Welcome to Symposia session number 4, Precision Healthcare Using AI to Revolutionize Breast Cancer Screening. I'm Sue Koch, Director of Health Marketing at Calian, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Calian is thrilled to be a Symposia sponsor and host for this live panel. We are a Canadian company with a global focus on helping people communicate, learn, stay safe, lead healthy lives. You can learn more about us at calian.com. Quick housekeeping point. Our session is 45 minutes today. We'll have a 30-minute panel discussion followed by an open Q&A. If you have questions for the panelists, just put those into the chat and we will answer those as best we can at the end of the session. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. While we are meeting virtually, we recognize the importance of the land to the Indigenous peoples who have been its stewards long before the arrival of European settlers. Today, I'm excited to introduce 4 expert panelists to explore our topic. Tina Rinker and Bob Shepard are the founders of Syantra and co-creators of Syantra DX. Joining Tina and Bob are Kaytlin Sadler, VP of Patient Solutions at Calian, and Jeff Smith, President of Pharmaceutical Solutions at Calian. So we'll kick things off with Tina and Bob. If you could tell us a little bit about yourselves and your journey with Syantra.
Great. Yes, so I'm Tina Rinker. I'm Chief Scientific Officer and a co-founder of Syantra. I'm also a professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Calgary, where I was also the interim, lead of the Early Cancer Detection Initiative in the Charbonneau Cancer Institute. This journey started about 10 years ago in terms of the development of the breast cancer test. So it's been in development for a long time, spun out from the University of Calgary, and now we have it available in Canada.
And I'm Bob Shepard. I'm CEO of Syantra. I'm a biomedical engineer also with a pretty heavy research background, 25 years in the lab, and really was quite excited to be able to have the opportunity to work on the project that eventually grew into Syantra. So happy to be on the panel and be available to talk about this today.
Sorry, I will now throw that over to Jeff and Kaytlin. If you could introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your experience with a new digital health platform that you've recently launched.
Thank you, Sue. I'm Jeff Smith. I'm the president of Pharmaceutical Solutions here at Calian. I've been involved in the pharmaceutical sector for 35 years, most dedicated to clinical trials, and about 10 years ago started up a patient support program company, which is facilitated by a proprietary software technology that we call Nexi, which is a workflow and workforce management tool. Kaytlin?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaytlin Sadler, and I'm the Vice President of Patient Solutions with Calian. And within the Patient Solutions division, we run 2 types of programs, one which is called patient support programs, and one which is community care programs. And within a patient support program, we're all about facilitating a patient's access to healthcare services, and we do that through financial assistance as well as nursing services. We do deliver our services at Calian using a digital health platform that is a proprietary software solution that's called Nexi.
All right, thank you for that. So now we're ready to dive into the panel questions. Breast cancer is the 2nd highest cause of death for women in Canada. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with the disease and 34 will eventually die. We know that early detection is a key indicator for survival, and screening is an essential part of that toolkit. Before I turn the first question over to the panel, I'd like to have a little interaction with the audience and hear from you. What do you see as the biggest challenge today in breast cancer screening? If you could type your answers into the chat, I'll take a look at those once we hear from the panel. So Tina, we'll start with you. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing today in breast cancer screening for women?
Well, breast cancer screening is typically performed by screening mammography, and 60% of women in Canada, roughly 60%, are participating in the screening program. So about 40% are not participating in the eligible age group, which is 50 and older. There are women that are participating in the screening programs that are younger. but it's not widely promoted. However, 18% of breast cancers are in women under 50. So this is, there's many underserved populations in our current screening program. So we need new tools to address these underserved populations. That also includes women that are in remote regions, non-urban centers. It's a little harder to access screening mammography on the timelines that are needed. Regular screening is really important for early detection. A lot of women aren't participating in in screening as well because of whether it be cultural issues, personal issues, scheduling experiences. So additional tools in this area would really improve, I think, participation in screening programs.
You're on mute.
Doing that. Bob, if you could add a little bit more about Syantra DX and how that screener adds value to early detection methods.
Yeah, for sure. So what we've done with Syantra DX is create a molecular assay to provide an avenue for breast cancer screening. This, of course, is different than an imaging-based approach, where now we're looking at biomarkers in the blood, so in the circulation. We really wanted to differentiate the way that we were approaching this molecular assay from what others had done. So if you are familiar with kind of blood-based testing, you'll remember the word or the phrase circulating tumor cells. So in the early days of this program, that was a focus that we thought might yield results. However, when we got into that, we said there's got to be a bit of a simpler way to do this. So what could we do with a whole blood sample that might provide similar information in a package that actually is quite easier to collect, process, and then provide an outcome? So what we did was we actually decided to look at gene expression in the bloodstream. So we started in the lab. Being engineers, we created lab models of this. Once we had what we thought was a signature that looked pretty good, we were able to move that into clinical samples and do some validation. And one of the things about the particular approach that we chose, we're not actually looking at cell-free DNA like a lot of the liquid biopsies that are currently in the press, and there's a lot of buzz around this. We're actually looking at whole blood samples with gene expression profiles that are expressed in that blood sample. And by taking that approach, it really meant that we needed to innovate a bit. So we needed to apply new tools to looking at the data and how we were going to get the outcomes that we wanted. And really what that led us to was the need for machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches to look at these large data sets that had correlation between multiple biomarkers so that we could find those key relationships and really have this diagnostic function the way that we wanted.
Okay, great. One of the audience members has said fear of the outcome. So that's an interesting one because that is potentially a barrier for women even trying to go get screening, whether it's mammography or a blood test. Do you think a blood test actually reduces a bit of that fear factor because it's the earlier you can get those results, the more you can do with the information?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so. And Tina, I think you probably agree. One of the things that we have heard, and we've done some market research on this, is really opinions about mammography are formed quite early in a woman's life, whether they be positive or negative. And once those sort of experiences and ideas about mammography are established, they're quite difficult to move. And some of that obviously involves experiences from either friends or family members. And everyone, I think, probably knows someone that's had, a challenging journey through the diagnostic pathway with breast cancer. This is particularly true for younger women and women with dense breast tissue, where imaging just doesn't work as well as it does in fatty breasts. So if you happen to be a woman that has, a C or a D level tissue density, I can totally understand why there might be some hesitation just to enter that path, knowing that this could be a long journey with a lot of steps and, potentially a lot of stress to get to an outcome that really everything's okay and you should stay in surveillance.
Right. And another person has said, Paul has said remote and rural access. And I know, Tina, you mentioned that in your comments. I'll get to this a little bit with Kaytlin, but anything to add there on sort of improving the access for people in remote areas?
Yes, so the Syantra test, for example, one of the ways that we develop the test is to specify a tube that has a preservative in it. So blood can be collected from remote regions and transported to a central laboratory for processing. So that lowers the barrier for being able to get access to a screening technology, and complements. There's mobile collection vans, but sometimes those are only coming by, once every year, couple years, 3 years. So there is a need for a fuller set or a different tool to add to the mix to increase screening options, and also just complement, just adding into Bob's previous discussion. I agree with your point that by having better tools and better access to the tools, screening mammography, blood tests for screening, you get to earlier detections, right? So now you're not necessarily detecting it on your own by feeling a lump or feeling something odd. You're actually going to your doctor routinely, getting routine screening by a blood test, and finding out earlier. And then I think that'll help lower the barrier to uptake, and finding early has much better treatment options. So each every month, the earlier you can find it, the better treatment options.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kaytlin, oncology is a major therapeutic focus for your patient support program work. In that practice, much of the care is delivered in people's homes by qualified nurses. Why is that decentralized model so effective, and how will it be applied to this screening method?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and really great comments that are coming into the chat as well. So backing up one step before we go into that decentralized healthcare model, if you look at something like a patient support program, the patient support program is really solving two pain points. One of those pain points is awareness, and one of those pain points is access. So for our customers, so let's look at the Syantra product, for example. We have this revolutionary product, but if a patient doesn't have the means to actually access that service or access that product, then that can be too big of a barrier to actually get that product into the hands of the people who need it. So that's what a patient support program does. So it's all about awareness and facilitating access. A patient support program will facilitate a patient's access to a product or a service, again, in two ways. So one is through financial access, and one is through nursing services. Those are the two biggest pain points from a patient's perspective. So if I have a worry about, I have this great product, I'm definitely in need of this service, I may be deterred from pursuing my treatment because of the cost to entry, and I may be deterred from pursuing that treatment or that screening because of my access to it. So for example, one of the comments came through around remote and rural communities. That's where a decentralized healthcare model comes in. So a decentralized healthcare model is all about being able to offer something that we refer to as convenient healthcare services. And what convenient healthcare services are, it effectively means offering services to patients when and where they need it. So if you look at some of the other industries, they've already gone and moved into this on-demand model for delivering their services and their products. So for example, if I want to order a meal to my door, I can order a meal to my door. If I'd like to order a ride to work, I can request a vehicle. So why not do the same with healthcare services? And how healthcare organizations will transition to that decentralized model is by taking those healthcare workers, and instead of putting them into these large institutional settings, so for example, a patient who is looking to receive the Syantra product, instead of having the patient travel to a local lab, perhaps there isn't one available in their area, then we can place the healthcare workers throughout the community, and we can offer those services to patients, for example, in their home setting or at work or at another location that's convenient for the patient. So transitioning to a decentralized model means moving the healthcare workers into our communities and connecting those healthcare workers through a technology solution. And for us, that technology solution is our Nexi digital health platform. So it kind of connects our decentralized healthcare model together, and it also reduces the disparate databases that we often see in healthcare. So our technology solution is not only linking our different healthcare workers together, but it's also linking all of the different systems that we're working with together as well.
Right, and you saw a lot of value in that during COVID. As some of the bigger centers weren't taking people, some of the labs were closing down. What are some of the learnings that you saw for this decentralized model that came out of the pandemic experience?
Yeah, there was a lot of different learnings for the healthcare system as a whole, not just on the Calian side, but for the healthcare system as a whole. I'd really focus on one key learning and key takeaway that speaks to the importance of having that decentralized model, and that is the burden on the healthcare workers that we saw during the pandemic. So if you look at the pandemic, in the very early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of ICUs. We didn't have a vaccine that was publicly available just yet. It was still in clinical trials, and we had a very high demand on the ICUs, so on the hospital system. The hospital system, which is supported mostly by public health nurses. Once a vaccine did become available, the hospital system and the public health nurses were still burdened by ICU increases. So when the vaccine did become publicly available, we as Canada didn't have the public health nurses available to actually administer the vaccines. So we saw a bit of a delay in vaccine availability and vaccine administration. So what we ended up doing within our vaccination clinics is government reached out to Calian and asked if we can tap into that decentralized model where Calian has existing healthcare workers that are located across the community. So we popped up different COVID-19 vaccination sites, and we brought in our healthcare workers from the community, and we kind of created vaccination clinics that were supporting the healthcare system so that our public health nurses could focus on ICUs and our decentralized model could focus on vaccinations.
Right. So switching gears a little bit over to Jeff, just a question now, when we talk about the patient support programs, the gathering of real world evidence is a very key component for a product like this. So once a product like Syantra becomes available to the market, how does the collection of real world evidence, how is that used to inform decision making? And how can running a study support a patient from research to care delivery to RWE data gathering?
Thanks, Sue. So before I jump into RWE, I'll just talk a little bit about bringing healthcare products to the market, such as therapeutics or medical devices and other type of products for the assessment for the treatment and assessment of disease. The process is lengthy and it's very complicated. Takes many years, lots of research, lots of subjects participating at various phases, usually in the research programs. And in order for the manufacturer to analyze the data and the regulatory authority to analyze the data appropriately, the data has to be a fairly clean data set, which means that we are looking at recruiting patients that are physiologically fairly homogeneous. So we would exclude certain patients from participating in a clinical trial for various reasons, such as high blood pressure or something like that. So then a product eventually gets approved for the market, and then it goes on to the market. The product will, once on the market, be prescribed to patients that would possibly and very likely have not been included in a clinical trial. So it's incumbent on the manufacturer to continue to collect data on this product to ensure the safety of the product on the market. Now, the Syantra DX product is somewhat different than a therapeutic or a medical device, but similarly, it's important for a healthcare product to continue to be surveilled as it's being administered, or let's leave it at administered, in the general population. So the process of developing a product for the market and then putting the product on the market leaves this gap of data, which needs to be filled. The gathering of this real world data and analysis of the real world data becomes real world evidence. And that can inform the marketing decisions of the company. It can inform the safety of the product. So for example, if during the collection of real world evidence, they see that there are some safety signals, then the regulators can pull the product off the market. And one of the advantages to collecting real world evidence is enhancement of the product. product. And that is what Syantra is doing in the prospective clinical trials, is they're continually gathering data from more and more patients. The data gathered to date has shown that the product is extremely accurate and effective, but Syantra's plan is to continually gather more and more data to continually improve the algorithms so that the product can be tweaked to become even more efficient. So the collection of RWE isn't always required for the development of a particular product. For example, if you're developing coffee mugs or face masks, it's not incumbent on the manufacturer to continually collect and analyze data for the development of the product. But in the healthcare system, it is particularly important. It also is becoming more necessary by insurance companies to prove that a product that's on the market is as effective as the clinical trial anticipated it would be.
Right. And Jeff, is it fair to also say that the decentralized model will help to maybe bring more people into that data gathering and that data set that might not be represented, underserved, rural communities, people from, places that might not get access to this type of product?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the primary advantages to the model that we have here at Calian. We not only have the clinical trial or RWE expertise in designing these types of trials and collecting and analyzing the data, but using our Nexi platform and administering the product to patients in rural areas and providing additional access to the product, we can gather more and more data. And the more data that we have, the more useful the data is for informing the development of the product.
Right. Thank you for that. All right, so let's shift the conversation to the technology behind Syantra DX. So Bob and Tina, can you share more details about it, and specifically how you used AI and biomarkers to create a more precise diagnostic tool? I guess, Tina, if you could start us off. Or Bob.
Well, yeah.
Whoever wants to start.
Maybe I'll jump in since I started that
Sure.
in the last round.
All right.
So really, what we're doing with this test is we're looking at a bunch of stuff that's contained in a blood sample. And unlike a traditional biomarker where you have a kind of a one-to-one relationship with a particular health condition, so looking at a cholesterol level or a glucose level, and it gives you sort of an indication of what needs to be done based on that particular measurement. What we have now is a bunch of things contained in a blood sample that we need to look at in a coordinated fashion. And those data sets can be quite large and quite complex. So the relationships between the biomarkers themselves may not be obvious when you look at the data with your own eyes. So really what that required us to do was to have a higher level of sophistication in managing that data and really understanding what it's telling us. And so we started with machine learning. And when we looked at the data from that machine learning lens, everything started to come into focus. And that really told us, hey, this approach that we're doing, it's got legs. And so we need to continue down that path. So it took us about a decade from the time that we began the development of this particular assay to get it to the point where we are today. So we are on the market as a service in Canada through our laboratory in Calgary. As Jeff alluded, we do have work to do to monitor that product on the market and to continue to expand the application of it. But through that initial application of machine learning and AI, we really were able to now coordinate multiple variables to create the signature that is at the root of the assay. And that's really how we're now looking at these whole blood samples, taking the measurements out of that, including a bit of patient clinical characteristic in the mix, and now coming up with this, yes, we found the signature for the presence of active breast cancer, or no, we have not. So when we think about now bringing that into market, it's a pretty different approach than doing a screening mammogram. So there's a lot of education and data that we need to share with the community. And working with Calian through their network and their tools that they have available really provides a way for us to say, now that we have this available, we're continuing clinical studies, we're looking at post-market surveillance and making sure that the test is doing what it's supposed to be doing. The digital health aspect of this is running completely throughout what we're doing with this test. Now, the other point that I would make about this is when we started the program, we really began with the end in mind. So we said to ourselves, what does an ultimate blood assay as a cancer screen need to be able to achieve? And we took those design inputs And we then looked at how do we get there from a scientific standpoint. So instead of starting with a bunch of data that we said, hey, how do we use this data to create a product? We said, what does a product need to do? And how do we take that data journey and arrive at that endpoint? So the AI, the machine learning, sort of this coordination of multiple variables at the same time was really key to allowing us to do what we've done.
Yep, and it's also, as Jeff was mentioning earlier, also enables us to enhance the product over time. So as we've heard in the news, there's a lot of groups that are not participating in clinical studies for various reasons, and it gives us an opportunity to make sure that we're evaluating as the real test is used in the real world, that we continue to evaluate those populations, but also it gives us the opportunity if there's an underperforming population in the group that we can actually use machine learning and AI as part of that continuous development and improvement of our processes and our tests. This is a platform that we're starting with breast cancer, but it is a platform diagnostic technology. And we developed it with that in mind, as Bob was saying, and worked with diagnostic partners along the way to ensure the process was easy to for laboratory technicians to run. We use standard equipment, which is available now throughout the world due to COVID testing.
Yeah, we wanted to use a platform that was pretty familiar to clinical labs so that we didn't create sort of an unnecessary niche for our test, a barrier to adoption, if you will, with a very specialized piece of equipment, specialized skill set in order to run the test. So we really adopted a qPCR platform that most labs are familiar with, most lab technologists can manage. So we wanted to make sure that the barriers to adoption were as low as possible.
Okay, great, thank you. So over to Kaytlin, how do you see the Nexi platform being used to unleash the potential of a product like Syantra DX?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and good question. Rolling it back to the last question, the main way that we unleash the potential of a product like Syantra DX is through access. Again, it's really all about access. And so there's two different components of how we facilitate access. One is through the decentralized healthcare worker model, and the other, so that's bringing healthcare services to the community so that patients in remote and rural areas can actually access those therapies or those screening programs. But the second way is through technology solutions. And a technology solution facilitates access to medication, again, by being able to request a healthcare worker, but it's also all about supporting a patient to gain financial access to a product. So before I get too much into detail around how we kind of facilitate that financial access piece, just to roll it back to Nexi for a moment. So Nexi, as we mentioned earlier, is our digital health platform at Calian. And effectively what that means is it's our enterprise resource planning solution. It enables us to deliver our services, meaning our healthcare workers are managed within that technology solution, but patients can access that technology solution as well. So the entire premise of the Nexi platform is that we automate the delivery of healthcare services so that we can reduce or eliminate the administrative burden for healthcare delivery so that we can spend more time with our patients. What that means from a patient's perspective for a product like Syantra is the patient has access to that technology solution themselves. So they can actually interact with Nexi and say, let's say I'm a patient who is looking for access to Syantra. And perhaps I have a concern about how I'm going to financially access the product. I would interact with Nexi and I would request a nurse, and then Nexi is actually going to ask me to enter my insurance information. And when I enter my insurance information and perhaps the province that I'm located in, so that it also understands my public insurance options that are available to me as well, Nexi then applies a machine learning so that we can compare the kind of profile of that patient to the current reimbursement landscape that's available within that province or available within Canada. And then we can inform the patient about the different financial options that are available. We can also support the actual application to obtain financial assistance because it can be complex from time to time. The other really valuable use case and how we kind of unleash the potential of a product like Syantra is also bringing awareness to the reimbursement landscape in Canada. So once products actually become available on the market, it's important for the insurers to understand how those products are actually being used in the real world. So if we have patients who are going on to a product like Syantra, and the patient is simply, let's say, paying out of pocket, and the insurance company does not become aware that there is a demand for this product, then the reimbursement landscape won't evolve along with how products are actually being used today. So what Nexi does is it kind of connects all of the different stakeholders together, and it informs the insurers of how or what the demand is for certain products, so that we can kind of force evolve the reimbursement landscape to match how those products are actually being used in the real world. And we do that through a machine learning. I see that there's a question there, Sue. Did you want me to pause and maybe?
No, we were going to do the questions at the end. So if there's nothing else to add to that point, we'll just go to our final sort of sum, and I'm going to do a lightning round with everybody if you have any other comments to add. So I've just put a question into the chat. So where does the audience see AI bringing value to healthcare in the near term? So we're sort of saying 2 years. When we've been talking through the panel today, we've talked about the innovation around the early detection of breast cancer, and sort of 5 key areas have come up in that discussion. We've talked about access. So how do we provide screening to more women in more communities, and especially underserved communities that maybe don't have access to the existing methods now? Personalization, so creating that decentralized process that is faster, more convenient, and potentially also less expensive to administer. On the accuracy side, we can offer additional screening data and information for women to give them more, sort of more of a power in terms of more information at the early stages, so that cancer, maybe it's less of a scary journey because you're catching the diagnosis early. Optimization, so diagnostic imaging can be used where it's needed the most in that sort of path of early diagnosis. And then finally, automation. So we can make the testing process more personalized, again, by coming to where the patient is, convenient to them, the idea of on demand, and so more accessible in that way and more efficient. So with that, those are kind of my summary points. Let's go to a 1 minute each sort of speed round to talk about what you really think is the biggest area of impact that this screener is going to bring to Canadian women, and really women around the world. Tina and Bob, we'll start you off first, and then Kaytlin and Jeff, if you could add your final thoughts before we go to the questions.
Great. So it's been great being here in this panel. I think this test will benefit women for having a new tool available. This is a molecular tool, so it's a different technology than an imaging-based tool, X-ray-based technology. And this is really going to benefit women especially women with dense breast tissue, for which mammography is not performing quite as well. With the molecular data, I think an example is our first customer, Jacqueline. Jacqueline, one of our first customers, Jacqueline, she had been getting suspicious mammograms for many years, and she's under 50. And so she took the Syantra test, and its negative result helped her to be more sure.
Right.
Yeah, I would echo Tina. I think it really fills a gap. So there are certain groups of women that mammography just doesn't work as well for. So having an additional way to come in and do some screening to sort of supplement the information that comes from imaging really provides a way to fill those gaps. And Jacqueline was a great example of someone who had been through this a few times and was really like, even when a radiologist would say to her, yeah, we don't really see anything of concern at this time, she's like, well, I don't know what that means. So taking our test allowed her to say, okay, well, now I have a negative blood test and I have images that don't look suspicious, so I feel better about my health situation. I think also as we kind of have more experience with the test and we look at expanding what it can do, there is the potential that we can begin to get more personalized information out of it. So not only will it be able to say yes or no for a breast cancer signature, but for those who have a yes, we might be able to drill into that a little bit more and provide additional information more quickly than you would if you had to go all the way through a biopsy and wait on the pathology to come back from that. So as we look at where AI-enabled things may go, I really think it is around a personalized health profile, and I think it's going to come pretty quickly.
Great. All right, over to Kaytlin.
I would say that our biggest possible area of impact is certainly around access. So it's taking, revolutionary products like what Syantra has created and enabling Canadians, even in remote and rural areas, to be able to access those revolutionary products. It's more than just remote and rural areas, though. It's also about removing the barriers for any patient. Those barriers, for example, being even if you live in an urban setting, maybe you have some questions about how you financially access that product, or where do I go to access the screening test. So I think in a single word, it would be around access. If we drilled that down a little bit more, access really means that, again, decentralized healthcare model. And I think moving towards a decentralized healthcare model as, the healthcare system as a whole really brings 4 main benefits. And that's, again, simplified access to financial programs, more convenient access to nursing services. So really transitioning the healthcare industry more to an on-demand model. And then, of course, reduce government spend within our healthcare systems. It is shown that decentralized models are more cost-effective for our government systems. And then improved wait times, which, of course, we saw as a real-life use case with the COVID-19 clinics during the pandemic.
Great. And Jeff, final words.
So building on the obvious benefits of the product that Bob and Tina had mentioned and improved access that Kaytlin had mentioned, I think another important point to mention is data management. So the process that we are implementing to get the product in front of more people, to collect the data about the people that are using the product, and then analyzing that data to improve the product, I think is incredibly important. It's kind of like the plan, do, check, act cycle that people are familiar with. Get the product out there, see what it's doing, check that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and then improve if you can.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to go to questions. So we do have one from Alex. Alex is asking, is this product available for patients to access now, or is it being used exclusively in clinical studies at the moment? So I'll put that over to Bob and Tina to respond.
Yep.
Yeah, so it is available now. So we have a laboratory accreditation from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta, which means we provide access to the test commercially as a service out of our Calgary-based facility. It is through relationships such as we have with Calian now, becoming available across Canada. So if you check our website, www.syantra.com, you'll see all the information. And within the next few weeks, there will be a new and improved version of the website that will help you find a provider and a path in your area so that you can access the test if you would like to. Now, that said, clinical studies do continue. So we do have an option to participate in those in some limited regions in Canada and other jurisdictions. So that information is also available on the website.
Okay. No one responded to my question from the audience. Where do you see AI bringing the most value in the next 2 years? So if anybody has any response to that. I don't see any other questions coming in. We have a couple more minutes. So in terms of the access and availability, so there's a bit of confusion about with these kind of precision diagnostic tools, it's not necessarily a Health Canada approval process, it's a provincial process. So do you want to talk to that a little bit in terms of how that works? And I think that also comes into insurance coverage as well.
Yeah, so it is a different path. And really, because it's a laboratory service, it is regulated by the provincial college. And really what you think about is, as a patient, if you want this test, you can go to your physician and request a requisition. Once that requisition is executed, we can schedule the blood sample to be collected. And so Calian, through their Alio health arm, is able to support that activity. The samples then come back to the laboratory in Calgary where the test is performed. Then the report that's generated, which will have that positive or negative outcome for the presence of the breast cancer signature, will go back to the ordering physician. So really, the difference in the Health Canada model, which is we can put things into a kit and sell it to any lab. And what we're doing now under that provincial laboratory accreditation is the fact that we're providing that service and we're engaged directly with the doctors so that the doctors receive that information and are appropriately able to action the follow-ups.
And I'll just add one thing in that the clinical data, the clinical studies have involved a population between the ages of 25 and 80.
Okay, great. That brings up another question around age. With mammography, we've talked about how, there's a program for women over 50, but when you're under 50 and you're not necessarily in a risk group, it can be hard to access that scan. How do you see that sort of opening things up for women of really all ages, at least 25 and up?
Yeah, so in terms of test performance, for example, the Syantra test performs really well for women under 50, 98.5% accuracy. And this is huge. I think this opens up new doors and will facilitate the continued expansion of screening for women in terms of breast cancer. It should become earlier. I'm a big advocate of we need to screen earlier because women in their 20s, 30s, 40s are developing breast cancer, and there's not a large genetic link that's been identified to put people in higher risk groups. So it's a small percent of the breast cancers that are actually detected. So we need to screen more at younger ages. So we need to continue to push those boundaries.
Yeah, and I will say certainly there's a conversation to be had about the best use for tools like we have with Syantra DX. We're open to those conversations and we want to participate. And I think, just having this tool available really now takes this from being a theoretical conversation into a practical one. And I will add that, the information we're collecting in patients with Calian is quite important because having that real world evidence really supports now identifying those populations and those groups for which the benefit is greatest. And that's really where we want to go with this in the early days. And certainly looking at reimbursement is another important aspect of this. And so just to be clear, being able to provide the test on the market legally is a separate conversation from how it's paid for. So we've now checked the first box. We've made the test available in Canada and we're moving it into other jurisdictions as well. And we're ready to have that conversation about best use, reimbursement, and all those things that are going to, make it more mainstream and actually pave the way for additional tests like this down the line.
Right. And another question follow-up for Jeff around the machine learning component of that as we get more data in, as we can serve more populations. Do you see any additional changes even to a program like Nexi as we detect more need, more variables from the people who are wanting to access this? How does that actually find its way into the evolution of the platform that's supporting this rollout?
That's a good question. So as we have done throughout the development of Nexi, which has been about 10 years of development, our main goal is to make the system more efficient, to reduce administrative burden. So we're constantly gathering data, changing the algorithms within the Nexi system so that the Nexi system can actually adapt on its own to new inputs for whatever program we're talking about. And when it comes specifically to the Syantra product, the anticipation is that we're going to be providing this product to thousands and thousands of patients. We'll be collecting a significant amount of data on these patients for the prospective trial. And we'll do the same thing that we've been doing in the past, is we will be modifying the functionality of the system, not the data and the data inputs, the way that we collect the data, but certainly the method of collection of the data can change and automate over time through the machine learning functionalities that we have at Nexi.
Great.
So
all right.
Basically what I'm saying is it'll get more efficient.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're almost at the hour. So I want to thank everybody for participating in our panel session. Thank you to the panelists. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I think it's got such a potential for a huge impact for women. For the audience attendees, if you have additional questions for our panelists, you can connect with them on the virtual event platform. We've also put the website addresses for each of the companies in the chat, so they'll have contact information on there as well. And then you're welcome to visit the networking lounge and the patient partner meetup sessions that are happening this afternoon. And with that, I'd just like to thank everybody for your time and wish you a wonderful afternoon and rest of the conference. Thank you.